And now I will turn it over to Mike for any opening remarks before we take questions. Mike?
Hi, everybody. Here we go again. From my perspective, this quarterback draft, like every draft, drives the top end of this thing. And I'm always amazed, and maybe I shouldn't be, but last year, 3 of the top 12 picks were quarterbacks, and all 3 were trade-ups on draft night. The year before, the Rams went all the way up to 1 to go get Goff. The Eagles went from 13 to 8 to 2 to go get Carson Wentz. It's a quarterback-driven league. I think it's going to be a crazy first 8, 10, 12 picks. So many permutations of the quarterback conversation. And just to kind of underscore the importance of a, quote, franchise quarterback, think about these 2 numbers. When the Houston Texans had Deshaun Watson, they averaged 35 points a game. When they didn't, they averaged 13. When the San Francisco 49ers had Jimmy Garoppolo, they went 5-0, and they averaged 29 points a game versus when they didn't have them, and they averaged 17 points a game. So the, quote, franchise quarterback conversation is riveting, especially when you kind of look at what Case Keenum goes to an NFC championship game. Blake Bortles, although he was a top 10 pick, was not considered a high-level franchise quarterback. He goes to the AFC championship game, and Nick Foles wins a Super Bowl with the Eagles. Is that an aberration or a trend? And those conversations, those quarterback conversations, I've had with most of the league over the last month, and trust me, it's really been fascinating. So having said that, let's open it up and have some fun.
Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. How's it going?
Good.
I actually wanted to ask you about 2 guys from the University of Pittsburgh, in Quadree Henderson and Brian O'Neill. I was just kind of curious, where you see them getting drafted and also what their roles could be in the NFL, with Quadree as a return specialist, possibly a wide receiver, and Brian as kind of like an athletic guy who moved inside. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, here's the deal with both those guys. Brian O'Neill is a really gifted athlete who was a tight end and basketball player in high school. Long, great feet, athletic, but a little bit underpowered. And he's probably going to end up going in the second round, but it may take him a little while to get strong enough to really be a quality left tackle in the league. I don't think he's getting kicked inside. He's going to be a left tackle. The concern with him is, will he be like a Jake Fisher or a Cedric Ogbuehi, meaning a really gifted athlete, but underpowered? Quadree Henderson is a wide receiver / running back / kick returner whose value really lies in the kick return game. Had a much better 2016, got more touches. He's a space player from scrimmage, but really the value's in the return game. I see him somewhere late third day, 6th or 7th round.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Jenny Ventris with Sports Illustrated. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for your time. This class of quarterbacks for the last year or two had been anticipated, it seemed. Now at this point, I guess I just was trying to put it in context to other classes. It seems like there's a quantity of quarterbacks, but how does the quality compare to past years?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think people were so anticipating this class that it surprises people when we start to kind of pick our way through them and really grind the tape. To put it in perspective, the 2 easiest quarterback evaluations I've had in the last 8 or 10 years are Andrew Luck and Carson Wentz. And that's because everything checked off both on the film and all the intangibles. Those 2 guys walked and talked like Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, etc. I don't see anybody in this class that I get the same gut feel for as those 2. Darnold's my number one guy because I think he can beat you from both inside the pocket and outside the pocket. But after him, I feel like you can kind of pick apart different characteristics of each player. And real quickly, when I look at Allen from Wyoming, biggest upside in the draft, really exciting player, obviously has to learn how to be a little bit more accurate, and he's got to throw with timing and anticipation. Josh Rosen, the most natural thrower in the draft, but he reminds me of Sam Bradford, both because they throw the ball naturally, but also the question about durability. And Rosen's been hurt in college. He has an inability to protect himself in the pocket. He's a tough kid, but he gets hurt a lot. I don't know if he can survive an NFL pocket for prolonged periods of time. Mayfield, it seems to me like some teams love him and some teams just kind of go, that's not my cup of tea. The film's good, but at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision in your building about who you want being the face of your franchise. And he's really cut both ways for a lot of teams. The guy that I'm just really excited about is Lamar Jackson. I think he's the most spectacular athlete in this draft. I think somebody in the first round is going to make a philosophical and schematic commitment to this kid and change what they do offensively. And it might not be this year where he makes a significant move, but I think long term, I can't wait to see what Lamar Jackson becomes. So when you look at those 5 kids, history tells you we'll be lucky if we get 2 to 3 that become franchise quarterbacks.
Thanks.
The next question comes from Dom Constantino with Deadspin. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for your time. Wanted to ask you, why you think there's so much interest in the draft in general and in mock drafts in particular.
If somebody told me 15 years ago I'd be making my living doing the NFL draft, I would have laughed at them. I think there are 2 or 3 reasons. I think, number one, the college fans drive part of it because they want to see what happens to their favorite players, and they're a very loyal group. Number 2, the NFL fans obviously can't wait to see what's going to augment their existing NFL team. And number 3, I think that the advent of fantasy football several years ago just blows me away. The interest level, everybody thinks they're a GM now, and they can't wait to build their team, and this is the beginning of their new team. So I think when you add all those things up, the draft has become this huge event, and I think because of that, the mock draft energy has picked up steam. I mean, I see guys doing 7-round mock drafts, which is mind-boggling. I see guys the day after this draft doing next year's first round. I couldn't even name you 32 players in next year's draft. I don't know how they do it.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
The next question comes from Chris Brown with Buffalo Bills. Your line is now open.
Yeah, Mike, I'm just kind of curious what you feel is the number 1 or 2 areas where, Mason Rudolph is lacking and why that's kind of keeping him out of that top tier and has him a little bit further down.
Sure. I really like Mason Rudolph. And if he becomes a quality starter in the NFL, I don't think it would surprise me. And I think we are sometimes guilty of only talking about the top-tier guys at every position to the exclusion of some really good football players. The 2 things in my head with Mason Rudolph are, number 1, for a 6'5", 240-pound guy, he's got fairly average arm talent. And I don't want that to be overblown because arm talent is overblown. But he doesn't blow you away with an ability to drive an 18-yard far hash comeback. Number 2, and what I think is a little bit more important, in today's NFL, you've got to have some escapability, some ability to buy extra time, and I think he struggles with that a little bit. When he's got time with clear feet and clear vision, he can drive the ball, and I think he's the best deep ball touch and accuracy thrower in this draft. So I'm very bullish on this kid. I like the kid himself. I think he's a smart kid. I think he's going to be a starting quarterback in this league. But those are the two things that and they're nitpicking, but those are the two things that I would qualify. Next question, please.
Next question comes from Matt Kawahara with San Francisco Chronicles. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. I appreciate your time. I just wanted to ask you about the Oakland Raiders at number 10, kind of what you see as a best-case scenario for them with that pick, and also what you think the chances are of the possibility of them maybe trading down to later in the round and what position they could look at if that were to happen.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's been kind of fascinating watching Coach Gruden and Reggie and everybody working the free agent period. I think they were probably more active than anybody. And what they're trying to do, I think, was sign a bunch of one-year contracts to fill a bunch of needs so that when the draft day came, they could deal from strength and pick the best player on their board. They're sitting at 10, and I think if they went offense at 10, you know, I look at how much money they have invested in their offensive line. I look at Darnold 10 at age 35, and I think a guy like Mike McGlinchey, who's clearly the number one tackle in the draft, would have to be of interest. I think on the defensive side, there's a bunch of playmakers that are considered top 10 picks that could fit in with them. And, you know, I think Chubb will be gone. I think the two inside linebackers, Roquan Smith, is outstanding. I think Edmonds from Virginia Tech is outstanding. Both safeties, Fitzpatrick and James, are unbelievable. And, you know, if you wanted to look corner, it'd be Denzel Ward. So I think the only offensive guy that would fit the profile would be McGlinchey. But I think they're going to have a choice of one of those defensive players, and they're all special. And as far as trading back, I think that's just I think you're getting where they are in the top 10. I think they're getting a special player. Depending how far they want to, how far they're willing to drop, is really what it comes down to. What's the compensation, and how far down would they be willing to go? Next question, please.
Next question comes from Lindsay Rhodes with NFL Network. Your line is now open.
Why are you laughing? Stop laughing. It's not funny. Hey, Mike, I'm looking at your six-man top 5 running back list here, and I noticed that Ronald Jones dropped to number 5. We have him here in studio today on Total Access, and I was wondering if you could explain to him what you were seeing that led you to make that decision and what he still needs to work on.
Really appreciate you putting me on the spot. Thanks, Lynn. It's awesome.
You're welcome.
Look, I've got Ronald Jones as a second-round running back, and I think that's pretty special. I think his ability with the ball in his hands is as good as anybody in this draft. The concern I have is whether or not he has natural hands. And at 205 pounds, basically you're looking at a back that's not going to get 25 touches in the run game. I know what he can do with the ball in his hands, and I know when you hand it to him, he's fine. My concern is just third down, change of pace, throwing the ball, pass protection. How elite will he be at that level? But trust me, I love his football game. I just question the natural hand. Next question, please.
The next question comes from Darryl Slater with Newark Star Ledger. Your line is now open.
Mike, with the Jets at number 3, say Darnold and Allen are off the board. I know there's a lot of permutations, but say those two guys are off the board. Do you go Rosen or Mayfield? What would you do? And what do you think Mike Maccagnan would do between Rosen and Mayfield?
That's a minefield for me because from my viewpoint, as I said earlier in my longer dissertation about the quarterbacks, a lot of being a GM is eliminating variables and trying to get people off of your board for different reasons. My two top quarterbacks are Darnold and Allen. if I'm the Jets, I'm struggling telling you I would take Mayfield or Rosen, in all honesty. I don't have either of them rated that highly. So I have a different answer for you than Mike Maccagnan will. I think Mike Maccagnan and the Jets need a quarterback that can step in and play fairly quickly, and I think Mayfield and Rosen are both able to do that. From a Jets perspective, will they embrace the swagger of Mayfield, which is pretty significant, and he might play really well if he's successful, obviously, on Broadway. Rosen, again, for me, it's more the durability issue than anything else. So if Maccagnan stepped up at 3 and took Mayfield, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Next question comes from Scott Petrek with Chronicle Telegram. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, I know you said you don't know about the quarterbacks, but do you get any sense or any feel for what the Browns and Giants are going to do at number 1 and 2, less than a week away?
If you're asking me for my gut feel, okay, just based on all the film work I've done and talking to people around the league, et cetera, my gut tells me that at 1, Cleveland will take Sam Darnold. And my gut tells me with the Giants, Gettleman likes to stay in his lane. You all know he hasn't moved down before. If he moves down, and by the way, I think the draft starts at number 2 with the Giants and whatever they decide to do. So let me put it this way with Gettleman and the Giants. If they fall in love with a quarterback that they think is their franchise guy for the next 10 years, that has to trump everything else, regardless of fans that want Barkley or whatever, and you have to take your quarterback. However, if you have any concern whatsoever, there are 3 great position players there, or you can trade down. And I think the furthest he'd be willing to trade down would be 6, which is where Indy is. Because if he went to 6 and quarterbacks now go 1, 2, and 3, he's still going to get Chubb, Barkley, or Nelson. So I don't think he's going past 6. And if he stays at 2, as much as he likes his hog mollies, I still think that Barkley will be the guy.
Next question comes from Josh Katzenstein with New Orleans Times-Picayune. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, just wondering if you could give your evaluation on this defensive end class, and if the Saints can't really find a, impact edge guy, would they be better off maybe building up the interior of that line?
Yeah, the edge thing is tough this year. Last year, we set a record for edge guys drafted in the first 3 rounds. This year, the edge conversation is really kind of difficult. The question I think I have is if they're sitting there at 27, if Harold Landry gets there, I think he's got to be in their conversation from Boston College. I don't really think he's going to get that far. And if he doesn't, then you're talking about a drop-off unless they want to take a projection with a Lorenzo Carter from Georgia, which is a little bit high for him. So, if they don't go edge at that number, I'm not, let me tell you something. I'm a little intrigued by the Patriots and the Saints with who their next quarterback's going to be. And, in my head, guys like Belichick and Peyton who think outside the box and are very smart men, whether or not they'd be looking at Lamar Jackson and committing to that young man down the road. And in my head, again, I think New Orleans is a potential landing spot for him. But I think the priority would be to try to find the edge guy. And if not edge, I think they're just the corner value, the linebacker value. They could go a couple different areas, including a matchup receiver.
The next question comes from Tom Rock with Newsday. Your line is now open.
Mike, we know Saquon kind of headlines the running back class. I wonder if you could just kind of break down what you think of this year's running back crop, and particularly if the Giants, if they do pass on Saquon, what they might be able to get later in the first or top of the second.
Yeah, let me give you just a 20-second overview on what's happening in the league now. I've had this conversation with a bunch of GMs and coaches, and it's kind of like, here's the deal. Let's forget about labeling offensive skill position players for a second and understand that wide receivers since the 2014 class, the first round has fallen off the cliff. You know, Amari Cooper's had some production, and that's about it. So players are saying, forget what you call them. Coaches are saying, forget what you call them. But they're not wide receivers. They're not running backs, tight ends. Find me a dynamic offensive player, and I'll figure out how to use them. And I think that's what we've seen at the running back position the last few years. You know, whether it's Kamara, who's one type of back, or Kareem Hunt, who's a different kind of back, both of whom go in the third round and literally change the way their offenses are viewed a year ago. So at the running back position this year, I think it's just as deep. Barkley's special. Darius Geis, I think, is a first-round talent that has got to be a little bit more consistent and mature with the way he projects himself. I think Sony Michel is a first-round talent. I think there's some concerns out there about his knee and whether or not that would push him in the second round. But I compare him a little bit to Alvin Kamara. I don't think he catches the ball as well, but a similar run game. And then you start getting into guys, again, at the top of the second, like you asked me, you know, Sony Michel, Ronald Jones from USC is a change of pace guy. Penny from San Diego State, great kick returner and really a good tailback at 222 pounds. And Nick Chubb, the other Georgia back. I mean, you can make a case for all four of those guys, top of the second round, all of whom I think are going to bring value to a team.
The next question comes from Charles Walker with Baltimore Sun. Your line is now open.
Yeah, hi, Mike. For the Ravens at 16, do you think they would be reaching if they took Calvin Ridley or DJ Moore at that spot? And which of those guys do you think would be a better fit in Baltimore?
Boy, that's a good question. Ridley's a little bit more of an outside guy only. Even though he runs great routes and his acceleration and burst is tremendous at 188 pounds or whatever he is, I struggle with him inside. I think DJ Moore has a little bit more versatility, plus he's a return guy. So I kind of like DJ Moore a little bit more than Ridley for Baltimore. You lost Campanaro, your punt returner. This kid might not give you as much early because he's a little bit raw, but he's built like a running back. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he's special. So I think it's a little bit early for either of them at 16. You know, I think they're more 20 to 30 type players. But I think Moore would be the better fit long-term in Baltimore.
The next question is from John Crick with Toronto Sun. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. There sure seems to be a lot of split opinions on Josh Allen. What attributes of his make NFL people believe he won't be the next cannon-armed bust like a Gabbert, Mallett, or a Lynch?
Interesting conversation. I wish we had, an hour. Here's the deal. I'm with you on he's got the biggest arm I've seen since Jamarcus Russell. And Jamarcus Russell was a bust. What I think differentiates this kid is his football IQ, passion, work ethic, and I could see a difference between 2016 and 2017, and I could see a difference between 2017 to the Combine and then again to the Pro Day. And I think with tall quarterbacks especially, footwork is critical. And most tall quarterbacks struggle early accelerating everything. And what he has to do is learn how to anticipate and throw with timing, even more than the whole accuracy conversation, because he's more accurate than people think. And I could give you a bunch of examples on very difficult small window throws where this kid fits it in where 5 quarterbacks in the world wouldn't even try to make the throw. He has to get his eyes and his feet connected, and he needs about 1,000 reps, and he needs to sit in a room behind Eli Manning or Drew Brees or Tom Brady. He needs a year behind those guys learning how to be a professional. But I love his intangible. The kid loves the game. He's willing to work. He's really athletic, which gives me hope for his footwork. So I'm kind of buying into the kid, as is a lot of the league.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Next question is from Ray Fittipaldo with Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Your line is now open.
Mike, with quarterbacks getting rid of the ball faster than ever, it seems like teams are valuing defensive backs much more than they used to. What's your take on that trend? And then the second part of the question is are the colleges producing enough of these DBs to meet the demand?
Yeah. It's a cat and mouse game back and forth. And, as the NFL is now kind of emulating college, as we're getting more and more of these spread type of players, spreading the field horizontally, ball comes out quickly. I'll tell you one thing we are seeing is defensive backs, corners that can press are critical, so you can disrupt routes immediately so that you can't just let everybody throw bubble screen all day long. But on top of that, it reinforces the importance of an interior pass rush. That's a trend. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, defensive tackles that stopped the run were the priority. Now defensive tackles that can affect the quarterback are the number one priority. So immediate pressure up the middle bothers quarterbacks more than anything else. If you can protect your quarterback from guard to guard, you can push those elite pass rushers past your quarterback and let him squat in there and have time to throw the ball. So being able to disrupt the quarterback inside out has become a trend. That's a big deal. Having corners that can press, safeties that occasionally can press, has become a big deal. And the other thing that's become a big deal, it's a matchup game. And who's matching up with the tight end that is now a big wide receiver? Do you have a D-back that can cover him man-to-man? Can you cover the running back out of the backfield? Who's your linebacker that's going to line up across from, pick a name, the Saints rookie running back from last year? So at the end of the day, it's a matchup league, interior pressure, and, yeah, the corner position, I think, has been prioritized for years.
Thank you.
The next question is from Eric Branch with San Francisco Chronicle. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. I wanted to ask you about Arden Key, just your assessment of him as a player, your sense of him off the field, and I'm asking from a 49ers perspective. Obviously, they're taking some heat for, still just having Reuben Foster on the roster. Is that obviously nowhere near the first round, but is that something they could even do? I mean, maybe just from a PR perspective, and I realize that's a bit subjective, but those are my questions. Thank you.
Yep. There are a significant number of players with character and medical concerns every year. Arden Key is one of the main guys on the character side. I would tell you, from an athletic perspective, if he was clean off the field, he'd be a first-round edge rusher. As it is now, if he went in the third round, I'd be very surprised. If he went somewhere in the fourth or fifth round, I think that's where it would be. And obviously what it is mitigating risk, and both financially and with your owner and your fan base. You take a guy in the first 3 rounds, it's a significant commitment, and this kid has had a lot of issues. So at the end of the day, you've got to provide a environment and infrastructure to try and get him day by day, over the next 4 to 5 years, and it's asking a lot.
Next question is from Barry Jackson with the Miami Herald. Your line is now open.
Hi, Mike. Had a specific hypothetical for you for the Dolphins at 11. If you say that the top 4 quarterbacks are off the board, and you also say Denzel Ward and Minkah Fitzpatrick are off the board, and you're Miami looking at Roquan Smith, Tremaine Edmonds, Derwin James, Vita Vea, those 4 defensive players, which might you lean toward if you're Miami, knowing their front 7 needs here?
Barry, give it to me again, the 2 inside linebackers.
Yeah, Mike, I have Roquan Smith, Tremaine Edmonds still on the board, as well as Derwin James on the board, and Vita Vea.
You know what? I mean, that's pretty good pickings right there now. Here's the way I look at this thing. With Vita Vea, as much as I love him, I'd like him to lose 15 pounds and stay there. And you're going to have to manage that for the next 5 years. And really the key to his value is how many snaps are you getting from him in a sub package. And if you believe you're getting significant pass pressure out of him, then yeah, he'd be worth the 11th pick in the draft. However, I think there's 2 question marks there with him that would discount him for me. I'd be looking, between those 2 inside linebackers and Derwin James, I think Roquan Smith and Derwin James are the safest. I think those 2 kids are special. I think they're home runs. I think they're plug and play day one, and they solve multiple issues for you on defense. The only downside to Edmonds, he's 19 years old. He doesn't even turn 20 until the week after the draft. I think his upside is higher than those other kids, but I think his floor is lower. I'm not sure what you're getting with him at the end of the day. So I would say either Smith or James, and you'd sprint that up to the podium and be really happy with either.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
A reminder to all participants, if you would like to ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1 on your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. To cancel your request, press star followed by the number 2. Thank you. And the next question is from, one moment please. From Mark Anderson with Las Vegas Review-Journal.
I'm just wondering what your evaluation is on Tyrell, Crosby, and Will Hernandez.
Sure. Two really good football players. Crosby, I see, is predominantly a right tackle only. Really liked his tape. He's got a little edge to him. Dropped some weight, got in better shape as the process went on, and tested fairly athletically. I've got him in mid to late second round, and I think he's a starting right tackle. Will Hernandez is a great conversation, and teams are a little bit all over the board. He was 340 at the Senior Bowl, 327 at the Combine. Which guy are you getting? Either way, he performed outstanding. But really, I think the gap scheme, offensive schemes like him more than the zone scheme does, and that makes sense. He's a tough guy, better feet than you think. If he goes, I think he's going to go somewhere between about 24 and 40. So he could slide into the first round, and he's a nasty, tough guy. I like both those kids a lot.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Next question is from Joe Person with Charlotte Observer. Your line is now open.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. Kind of wanted to have you go back in time a little bit, and you were still covering the draft when Marty Herney's first stint as GM, kind of what you saw from him during those years. And I know he had a lot of big hits in the first round with Cam and Kuechly and Peppers, and then some of the subsequent rounds, especially the second round, not so much. Just wondering what you think we can learn from his history as he moves forward here next week.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and I don't have his draft picks in front of me, obviously. You're right. He hit on a lot of those first-rounders, and, obviously being a BC guy, one of my favorite was Kuechly at whatever it was, 8 or 9, that I think surprised people. He took a linebacker that high, and I liked that pick because it showed me he wasn't afraid of somebody he thought could be great. And if Kuechly stays healthy, he's a Hall of Famer. So I think they stay in their lane a little bit and really prioritize without too much movement up or down the board what they what they feel like is their priority. And if you're sitting there where they are at 24, and I think they've got 2 third-round picks also, I think you're going to see him take a safety somewhere in there, one of the higher-level safeties. To me, that's Michael Adams, 37. At some point, corner, but and wide receiver, maybe a speed wide out. They've got to handle the tight end situation. Who knows how long they will or won't have Olsen. But I think what you're really going to see is a consistent philosophy, whether it was Herney or Gettleman, of kind of staying in the lane, trust your process, trust your scouts, and don't move too much up or down the board.
Thank you.
Yep.
The next question is from Ken Twentyman with Detroit Lions. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. Marcus Davenport, you hear a lot of comparisons to Ziggy Ansah with him. I was just curious your analysis of his game, and Detroit wants to be very multiple here with Matt Patricia. Does that skill set that he have kind of fit what they want to do here?
I'm a Marcus Davenport guy. I really like him, but I think the underlying understanding here has to be that he's very raw and is going to take a little bit of time. So even in a simple system where you line him up wide and teach him how to rush the quarterback, he's got a lot to learn. The further you get away from that, and by the way, he's a very smart kid. I'm not taking any shots there at all. I'm just saying he's raw as can be. So the further you get away from a simple system where you're asking him to do multiple jobs, whether it's rush and then the next snap you're dropping, you might have C gap, then you got B. The more you're asking him to do, the longer it's going to take him to develop. So in a Matt Patricia system, which is very complicated, I think it's going to take him a long time. So to answer your question, in a vacuum, he's better off in a simple system where he can just line up and go, as opposed to being asked to do multiple tasks.
Next question is from Jerry McDonald with Oakland Tribune. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, I'm sure after doing this for a long time, you kind of develop an idea of what certain GMs like. Now that Reggie McKenzie has John Gruden in the mix, and presumably, since by virtue of his contract, John will pick the roster, how do you see this Raiders dynamic in terms of the draft? What do you think they'll be looking for? How will it change with John added?
Yeah, it's interesting whenever you get a coach that's kind of sitting in the number one seat. And I think what you saw, Jerry, over the last 6 weeks is how quickly and aggressively they went out and signed free agents. And it wasn't the big-name free agents or the high-priced ones. It was free agents in the B and C lane that could fit immediate needs. And I think that was really smart because it allows you on draft day to just go get really good football players. And do they have holes? Of course they've got a bunch of holes. But I think I said earlier on the call, the way I look at Oakland early in the draft is at 10, if 4 quarterbacks go in front of them, they're sitting in a pretty good place. And the only offensive player I would even have ranked anywhere near that high would be Mike McGlinchey, the tackle, who I think fits a need for Oakland because Donald Penn is going to be 35 years old, and you've got a lot of money invested in that offensive line. McGlinchey would be a natural. However, there's going to be 5 or 6 defensive players available there that are big-time, game-changing defensive players. So I don't care whether you're talking about one of the 2 safeties, Denzel Ward, one of the 2 inside linebackers, Vita Vea. There, 1 or 2 or 3 of those guys is going to be there for them. And I think they can take that in any direction. And I think John's a very aggressive guy, and he wants to get this thing fixed quickly in his mind. So, they're 10, 41, and 75. And I think whatever they do at 10 will trigger the direction they head in the next 2 rounds.
Thank you.
Yep.
The next question is from James Crapia with AL.com. Your line is now open.
Mike, wanted your thoughts on 2 Auburn guys, Kerryon Johnson and where he fits in the running back class, and Jeff Holland and where he fits in the edge class.
Sure. Kerryon Johnson is a good football player. there's an average of 7 running backs that go in the first 3 rounds. And I've got him as my 7th running back. So technically he's in my 3rd round stack. I think he could go in the 2nd or 3rd round. He's kind of a leggy, jump cut guy, good athlete, finishes runs, but I see him somewhere late 2 to mid 3. The other kid is an interesting player because he's a combination. At Auburn he was an edge rusher. In the NFL he might have to stand up. And there are more of those type of players in this draft than I've ever seen, primarily because the college game is getting smaller and quicker to deal with this spread offenses. So we're getting all these undersized edge guys that we have to figure out what to do. Jeff Holland's one of them. So even though he showed he could rush the quarterback, he's going to have to be an off-the-ball linebacker that in a sub-package may be able to be a joker. In other words, moved around a little bit and provide extra value. I've got him in my, let's see, where did I put, in my 4th round stack, end of 4 to the beginning of the 5th, and I think special teams are going to be important for him early.
Thank you.
Yep.
The next question is from Victor Mather with New York Times. Your line is now open.
Who's the one player this season who's been hardest to place in your mock draft?
I haven't even done my mock draft yet, but I'll tell you the one that I've thought the most about is Lamar Jackson. And the reason it's so hard to place him is because his upside is so high. I wonder if somebody's really going to try and get him in the first 10 or 12 or 13, 14 picks just because he could be so special. The flip side to that is if he starts sliding into the 20s, you've got all these really good football teams with what I call a secondary quarterback need. They've got their primary guy, but you start at 17 with San Diego and Phillip Rivers, New England with Tom Brady. I said San Diego, I apologize, the Chargers. New Orleans, with Drew Brees is 39 or whatever he is. Pittsburgh with Ben Roethlisberger. So there's a whole group with secondary needs where I think would be the best place for him to go, to sit behind one of those Hall of Fame type quarterbacks and learn how to be a pro. So he's the most intriguing and hardest to place. So that I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Yep.
Question is from Nate Ulrich with Akron Beacon Journal. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. Earlier you said that your gut tells you at 1 that the Browns will take Sam Darnold, and I was just hoping you could expound on that a little bit. And if you think that maybe the debate there is really down to Darnold and Josh Allen, that's kind of been the national buzz for a while. Could you maybe analyze that debate?
Yeah, sure. Look, I've been saying that since the Combine, Darnold and Allen. And it comes off watching a whole bunch of tape and having a little bit of a feel for what I call, northern weather and having the ability to throw the ball. And people, when you talk weather, people worry about rain and snow. And I'm saying, no, I'm talking about wind, being able to step in the pocket and throw the ball in heavy winds in December. And immediately Darnold and Allen are the 2 guys that I think of from that perspective. If you look at John Dorsey's history, you know what he did a year ago. He took the biggest arm quarterback in the draft and traded up from 27 to 10 to get him in Kansas City. I really believe that the reason and this is Mike Mayock talking, not John Dorsey. I have no inside knowledge. My gut tells me that if you're choosing between the 2, Allen might have the higher ceiling, but you've swung and missed so many times in Cleveland at quarterback. Can you afford another one with your first pick? Your first pick has got to set the tone. And I think at the end of the day, it'll be Sam Darnold. And he's got a little Brett Favre in him, which I think John likes. John likes a little swagger. And he'll make some mistakes and turn the ball over. But at the end of the day, That's what my gut tells me.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
The next question is from Justin Ferguson with SEC Country. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to ask you about one more Auburn player, Braden Smith, where you think he kind of fits in the class, and do you think he's a guy who can, compete to be a starter right away in the NFL, depending on where he lands?
Yeah, I like Braden Smith. He's a big, powerful dude, played a couple different positions. I've got him at the bottom of in my second-round stack. I think worst case for Braden, you're looking at the top of the third round, and I do believe he can step in day one and compete. He's a lot of these offensive linemen, you got to wait for him to get enough strength to play in the NFL. This kid's ready to go right now from a strength perspective. So somewhere late second, early third, and compete day one as a starter.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
The next question is from Kyle Martin with Raiders.com. Your line is now open.
How's it going, Mike? Thanks for your time.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier how the Raiders could draft a multitude of players at the number 10 spot. What positions could you see them addressing later in the draft in days 2 and 3?
I mean, that's a hard one. I'll tell you somebody who will have some influence in that, though, is the Raiders special teams coach, Rich Bisaccia, who goes back with John to winning a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay. And when you get into that third day, I think the smart head coaches and general managers lean on their special teams coach a little bit. And I'll give you an example of a guy, okay? LSU's got a wide receiver named Russell Gage, who pretty much nobody's ever heard of. Yet, when I went to their pro day about 3 weeks ago, I had 3 different special teams coaches call me before I got to Baton Rouge and said, you better check out this Russell Gage, who I knew little to nothing about. I went up and introduced myself to the kid. I watched him run routes. I even interviewed him on television because I liked him so much. And my point is, he's probably going to be a 6th-round wide receiver, and I guarantee you Rich Bisaccia and every other special teams coach in the league is banging the table for this kid going, give him to me. He's going to be a core cover guy in special teams. And the great thing as a wide receiver is he's going to be active 16 Sundays every year because of his special teams, and that'll give him a chance to develop. So it's hard to give you exact names and positions they're going to target. It depends what they hit in the first few rounds. But at the end of the day, expect Bisaccia and the special teams guys to play a big role in it.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Yep.
The next question is from Sean Isabella with CNHI. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. Had a question about the Big 12. They're kind of lagging the last couple of years in Power 5 schools in terms of producing NFL draft picks. Wondering if you had any narratives on that topic or what you've noticed in the last couple of years during your evaluations.
Yeah, and you're not going to like this, and Big 12 coaches aren't going to like me. I'm just going to say I've had a lot of conversations around the league, and sometimes Big 12 football is really hard to watch, especially from a defensive perspective. On the one hand, I give them a ton of credit for being creative offensively, and they throw the ball. I mean, just to give you an example, Oklahoma State is 38-38 at halftime. I mean, it's fun television, it's exciting football, but 38-38 at halftime? And then I give University of Texas some credit because Texas played against Oklahoma State, and USC, 3 of the top quarterbacks in the country, and Texas held those 3 quarterbacks and those offenses to their least output of the year. Texas plays a different scheme. Defense is single high, 2 high, a bunch of really sophisticated sub-packages like an NFL team would. All 3 teams struggled, and here's Oklahoma State, who put up 38.5 against Oklahoma, scored 10 in regulation against Texas because Texas played a different way than most Big 12 teams play, and because Texas has athletes to execute the scheme. That's a long way of saying that a lot of us get tired of watching these wide receivers run down the field unimpeded against safeties that are playing quarter coverage and beat by 5 yards. It's hard to evaluate those guys. And in turn, when it's hard to evaluate them, then sometimes they get knocked down further than they should. It's just, and again, the last thing I want to say is that it's college coaches' jobs is to win football games. It's not to develop NFL players. It's to win football games. So I'm not taking a shot at their style of football. I'm just saying it's a different evaluation for the NFL people.
Thank you.
Yep.
The next question is from Mark Cabali with The Athletics. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike, in your experience, are there some organizations that are hesitant to use first-round pick on non-Power 5 conference guys, and especially on defense?
Wait.
Excuse me?
Can you back up? I didn't get any of the beginning of that. Can you start again? I'm sorry.
I said, in your experience, are there some organizations that are hesitant to use a first-round pick on a non-Power 5 conference player, and especially on defense? And to clear up that, will playing at a non-Power 5 conference hurt Van Der Esch at all, and how do you evaluate a guy like that?
I'm not sure whether it's your phone or mine, but I really have no idea what you're saying. I apologize.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I said, in your experience, are there some organizations that are hesitant to use a first-round pick on a non-Power 5 conference player, and especially on defense? And to play off that, will playing at a non-Power 5 conference hurt Van Der Esch at all, and how do you evaluate those guys?
Yeah, here's the deal. The non-Power 5 guys have opportunities to equal the playing field in the All-Star games. That's for the seniors, obviously. So if you go to the Senior Bowl East-West game or something, you get an opportunity to stand in the huddle with guys from Alabama and Stanford and wherever. And that's a great opportunity for certain players. For the most part, teams want to see players compete against quality on film. And you're right. If a kid is an underclassman from a non-Power 5, it's a little harder to convince yourself that at the end of the day, he's going to be one of your guys. Now, Van Der Esch has a different conversation. A lot of people really like Van Der Esch as a potential top 20 player. One of his issues is going to be medical. You know, he wears that neck brace for a reason. He's got a cervical issue, and teams around the league right now are having a conversation about how bad or good is it really, and at what level should we draft him. But I don't think Van Der Esch has any issues regarding level of competition and how good a player he is.
Thanks.
Yep.
A reminder to all participants, if you would like to ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1 on your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Thank you. And the next question is from Michael Galkin with Las Vegas Review-Journal. Your line is now open.
Thank you, Mike. Interior rusher for the Raiders. It's something that they're looking to address. You think sometime early in the draft, be it day 1 or perhaps even day 2 if they don't go there at pick number 10. Who do you see as options?
Which position?
Interior rusher.
Okay. Interior rusher.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you know, again, I've heard a lot of Vita Vea to Oakland. You know, people want to place him there. You know, and the way I look at the Raiders, again, is at 10. They can get a significant player at 10, and it doesn't have to be an interior sub-rusher or an interior rusher. You know, they signed Tank Carradine, who's going to be an outside guy, or Monty Bryant, who can be an inside-outside guy. I think they got to get Vanderdost going a little bit. But there's no doubt that, again, I think they can take a safety, they can take a corner. If you want to get a sub-rusher, it doesn't have to be in the first round. They've got 41 and 75. You know, you can drop down a little bit. There's some people who think Justin Jones from North Carolina State could be at 75 or even in the 4th round. a difference maker. A guy like Nate Shepard, Fort Hays State in the 3rd round. It's not a great interior defensive line class, but there's some different guys throughout it. P.J. Hall, people call him a nose tackle. You can get him in the 4th round. He ran 4.75 at 310 pounds from Sam Houston State. So I think there's going to be some better value for them at 10 and I love Vita Vea, but I'm just not sure what he gives you as a rusher in your sub package, which you're in 60 to 70% of the time.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
The next question is from Mark Cannizzaro with New York Post. Your line is now open.
Yes, Mike. I'm just doing something on the USC quarterbacks over the years coming out. Obviously, there's been some highly touted guys that have not panned out and made the transition to the NFL. I just wonder if you if you have a kind of a common denominator theory on that, and B, do you feel like Sam will kind of have that hanging over him until he proves himself in the league?
I'm a big believer that you can't really knock the individual kid for failures of other players in his program. Sam Darnold's a completely different kid than, name the last 3 or 4 USC quarterbacks. I don't care if you talk about Leinart, Sanchez, whatever. They're all different. They all have to be evaluated. There's different coaches that are asking them to do different things. So I don't think the league holds any of that over him. Having met him a little bit at his pro day, having known some people that are working with him, I'm highly impressed by his football IQ. We interviewed him after his pro day, the day he threw in the rain, and I got a kick out of him because he had a lot of humility, but it was tinged with a little bit of competitiveness and swag, and I like that, especially with a quarterback. I'm bullish on Darnold, and I don't think any. You can go back to Carson Palmer, who had a pretty good NFL career. So I don't think the recent failures of USC quarterbacks will hurt him at all.
Thank you.
Yep.
The next question is from Jim Wyatt with Titans Online. Your line is now open.
Mike, John Robinson obviously in a different spot this year, picking at 25 compared to the top 10 the first couple of years. What's the pool of players going to look like at 25, and is there a guy you think would be a good fit for Tennessee?
Yeah, Tennessee's got an interesting conversation because obviously you got Arakpo and Morgan in their contract years, getting up in age. Dodd hasn't gotten it done as a second-round pick. At linebacker, Woodyard's 32 years old. They signed Compton. They invested at wide receiver for sure. But where I look at 25, could there be a good off-the-ball linebacker there that makes a difference? Because if Harold Landry is there, that's a great opportunity. I think he fits what they do, and I think he'd be a really good fit for Tennessee at 25. Off-the-ball linebacker, we get into that conversation of Van Der Esch and his medical. If Rashaan Evans was there from Alabama, I would jump all over that. But if Evans is gone and Van Der Esch is not necessarily on your board medically at that point, then I think you're looking at Harold Landry. And then if not, if Landry's gone, there's a whole different conversation going on. They've got a tremendous offensive line. Delaney Walker is 33, 34 years old. They're stocked at corner. I think at that point you're just looking for the best player you can find. And at 25, would they? I really have them penciled in for an edge guy or an off-the-ball linebacker. So, I'm not sure where they'd go at that point.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, Harrison, safety from Alabama might make some sense also.
The next question is from Dan Rolfe with Canadian Press.
Thank you, Mike, for this. Thank you. Mike, you had talked briefly earlier about Nathan Shepard, and I'm wondering if I could get your thoughts and evaluation on him, please.
Yeah, I like him, man. Canadian kid at Simon Fraser. Then he goes to a small Division II school. Even though he only played a day and a half or so at the Senior Bowl, I think it really helped him. He is a big dude with an NFL body. He's got kind of rare movement skills. I think the 3-4 teams would look at him and say, wow, he could be a 5 technique, which is a defensive end in 3-4, but he also might have the movement skills down the road to develop into a sub-rusher inside. He's kind of a rare guy from a height, weight, speed perspective, raw as could be. I think he's, worst case, a second-round talent, but he might drop into the third round just because it might take a little while to get something out of him because he's so raw. But I'm telling you, I think the league is really intrigued by him and think he's got a lot of upside.
Are David Onyemata and Akeem Hicks favorable comparisons to him coming in?
You're really going Canadian, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, Hicks went, I think in the third round. Onyemata went fourth or fifth, if I remember correctly.
Something like that.
But I think Hicks is the better comparison because I think Hicks is a thickly muscled, big kid that had some explosion, a little bit more quickness and explosion than Onyemata. And I think that Shepard has some of that also.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Next question is from Dave Burkett with Detroit Free Press.
Mike, thanks for the call, and I apologize if you've addressed this already. I hopped on here a little bit late, but I just wanted to get two things. One, your scouting report on Darius Geis, what sort of pro you think he'll be, and then two, just the depth of running backs in this draft. How early is it? Is too early to take a guy like that? I mean, obviously Saquon's going the top, but if you're the Lions, if you're a team like that, is there more value in waiting to get a running back than to take one in the first round?
Yeah. Darius Geis, first-round talent. I don't think anybody questions his running style, which is north-south, tough, quick feet, ran better than people thought. He's a first-round talent. Reminds me a little bit, just style-wise, of a Frank Gore. Get a lot of carries, tough. His issues more are just, I don't know what the right word is. Maybe it's some immaturity off the field. What's his work ethic going to be like? Will he be a true pro? Will he show up to go to work every day? Some of those concerns could push him into the second round, but make no mistake about it, he's a talented kid. When you start looking at the Lions, I think you're on the right path as far as what's the style of running back. They signed LeGarrette Blount, obviously, but that's a one-year deal. So I think it's the bigger, stronger back they need that they can then pair with Abdullah or Riddick or whatever they're going to have back there with them. And I think in that bigger, stronger thing, I love Nick Chubb. I think you don't have any baggage like Geis has. He's completely over the knee injury from 2 years before. He's strong. He's tough. If you could get him in the second or third round, I think that'd be a home run.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question is from Justin Rogers with Detroit News. Your line is now open.
Hey, Mike. When talking about Marcus Davenport earlier, you thought he might be a bad fit for Detroit just because of how long it might take him to develop in Patricia's defense. Who are some of the defensive linemen, the early round guys, interior or on the edge, who you think might be a better out-the-box fit for a complex multiple front that Detroit's going to run?
Yeah, and again, I think Davenport could play for them. I'm just questioning how quickly he could make an impact. That's all. As far as edge guys, Landry, I think Rasheem Green from USC is an interesting player, bigger bodied guy that can provide interior sub flexibility. Same with Tyquan Lewis and Jalen Holmes. And I'm talking, these guys are more down like in the third or fourth round. And then as far as inside players, at the high level, Vita Vea and Daron Payne, I think, could be difference makers. And then as you start to work your way into the second or third round, I think Nate Shepard is a really interesting guy. I think down the line, Justin Jones, North Carolina State, is an interesting guy. Those are several names of bigger body type guys that I think that would fit in Detroit.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
The next question is from Tom Shad with USA Today.
Mike, I know, I guess it was a couple months ago now, you got a question about Patriots maybe drafting a quarterback there in the second or third round. I'm curious, of those guys that you had mentioned, Mason Rudolph, Kyle Lauletta, Luke Falk, which of those guys do you think the Patriots would most likely go after, and which of those guys do you think is going to have the brightest NFL career?
I think the Patriots are as comprehensive as any team I've ever been around. The homework they do is amazing. So I think they throw a wide net, and they look at a lot of people. And, you know, they've got 2 first-round picks. You know, they've got a lot of picks this year. I think the first guy they got to evaluate is Lamar Jackson. Does he or does he not fit for what they could do down the road? Belichick's an outside-the-box guy, and I think that's the first thing you got to think of is it's a contrarian move, but can you go from Tom Brady to Lamar Jackson? Just like I asked earlier, can you go from Drew Brees to Lamar Jackson? Then you go to the more conventional style quarterbacks, Mason Rudolph, Kyle Lauletta, Luke Falk. You know, the more tape I watch of Lauletta, the more I like the kid. I spent about 3 hours watching him last weekend. He's 6'2.5", 222, has enough arm. He's got some mobility. He's got a little moxie to him. I'm starting to think out of that next group, either Mason Rudolph or Kyle Lauletta are the 2 guys I like the most.